So now we are down to that third video that we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about like first the story, where you focus on performance, and then we talked about web performance, and then we talked about the backend and the different things, the frameworks, and all the little things that you need to deal with at that level. Now maybe we just, once we delivered that content or the DOM, okay, now what are the things that we should be careful about when we're dealing with web performance?
You mean sort of the journey between the server and the user, maybe, whether that's...
Yeah,
I mean, loads of things to be aware of. The first thing is never assume the network is on your side, because people have outages all the time. People go through data of kind of like black holes. Walking here, actually, this afternoon, what ended up happening to me was I swung by a coffee shop to grab a quick coffee, and they didn't have any Wi-Fi, which is fine because I've got data here. For the brief period we remain in the EU, I've got my data roaming.
Yeah, for how long? Is it like for 24 hours or something? No, I don't know.
Well, talking
You
about
get
the
a few days.
UK-EU thing.
Uh-huh.
So I've got data roaming. What ended up happening is I went into this coffee shop. They had no Wi-Fi, but also they had like a complete dead zone for data. As soon as I left the coffee shop, my phone would not turn back on. The phone was on, sorry, the data would not kick back in. So I couldn't get Google Maps. So I just walked in the wrong direction for 10 minutes hoping I was correct. So the first thing is just never assume the network is reliable. Because even if it is 90% of the time, assuming that it is means that 10% is going to be drastic. It's going to be bad. So
that's bad. When you go like in a subway or something, and then you get out and there is network.
Yeah.
But the device is still in state between where it doesn't have network because it's still on the other situation, and you can't open your Google Maps as you say.
Yeah, it's exacerbated by data roaming because I might be actually using other people's, like piggybacking other people's infrastructure. So in the UK, it's generally not going to happen that often because I'm with O2, and O2 have got a really good network. But I don't believe they've got any presence in Europe as far as I'm aware. Maybe that's not quite true. But so there's things like that. Things just aren't generally going to work in your favour. So there are things like reducing the amount of data transferred as much as possible. If you've got no data at all, then obviously if you've got no data availability, then it doesn't matter how small the data is. If you've got no internet connectivity, it's not going to work. So that leads to interesting things like offline first, service workers. Maybe Google Maps could have saved the state of my last session offline for me. And then purge that every time it updates, but it could lazily offline some stuff for me so that if I do go through a dead zone, I could be protected. But yeah, that's only one very small facet, I guess. There's so much to consider. I would say things like every company in the world who is at least slightly concerned about performance should be running on a CDN. They are commoditized, they're very cheap. Certainly all of your static assets from a CDN, but nowadays with either things like edge computing or serverless, getting actual application logic on the edge is getting cheaper and easier.
Yeah. And there are a lot of offerings out there.
A lot, right? It's only getting better.
But have you ever run into clients that didn't want to use CDN for some reason?
I've had a couple of clients.
Are there good reasons for not using CDN?
A very, very, very small number of reasons. One was a huge company who was very aware of financial data and very sensitive information, and they basically had to do a lot of stuff on-prem. Now, that's slowly changing. It's been a long time since I've worked in that environment, but I did work at a company with a company where they weren't allowed to use any off-site solutions. So things like they couldn't use Trello because it's someone else controlling the data. They couldn't use a CDN. They had to physically own their own servers. So it's very rare.
But also with GDPR, some people are like, okay, does it copy data, and what does it mean CDN for GDPR? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Really, really small bit of work with British government. They were very concerned about giving their some of their like user, not analytics perhaps, but some of their user data could have been processed by a third party, and they were immediately like, well, no, doesn't feel right. But for the most part, certainly most commercial clients, they're completely fine using a CDN, and it's the right thing for them to do.
It's magical.
Yeah.
It's like it can be more easier. I don't see.
I use There are some CDNs that are better than others, but every CDN is generally a good idea. But I use Cloudflare, and I adore Cloudflare because...
Why do you like it more than the others?
Well, simple technical...
Obviously, you're not sponsored by Cloudflare.
Yeah, not sponsored at all by Cloudflare, and I don't dislike any of the others, but...
we use CloudFront.
So CloudFront's good. It's half there. I can explain exactly why.
I would like to understand. Maybe we'll consider something else in that case.
Well, so HTTP2 is obviously a very powerful new protocol, but the problem is its prioritization mechanisms were a little bit under-spec'd, so it was very much left down to interpretation. And this basically means that, unfortunately, CDN...
Can you explain maybe since the beginning, first the protocol? Can you explain a bit about it?
Yeah, so HTTP2 just allows for much more intelligent and binary sort of sending of data, so it's fairly asynchronous.
And multiplexing.
Yeah,
you can
multiplexing.
send several
exactly.
things on the same socket.
It's all binary. It can just be sent in the same TCP connection. But those chunks of data that get sent, those packets, they need to be prioritized. And the priority basically, it marries up information from the browser, such as this is a highest or medium or lowest priority resource, with the order in which the CDN should respond. So the CDN should be able to decide, okay, I'm sending some low priority data, and then all of a sudden, oh no, a highest priority request has been made. A good CDN will be able to just swap and send the highest, interrupt the low priority. Now, Cloudflare is really good at that, and that's largely because my buddy Pat Meenan works on it, and he's one of the smartest guys alive. So Cloudflare, he used to work for them full time, worked very, very closely on prioritization. So Cloudflare get it really, really right. Akamai get it right, Fastly get it right. Cloudflare is one of the only ones who gets it half right. So sometimes you'll be completely fine, sometimes it might not work quite how you expect. I won't name the bad companies because that is just in bad taste, but there are some really big companies they have unfortunately got it really badly wrong. So it ends up being a net loss, and it makes sites actually slower, which is a shame. And those companies are aware of it. It's probably just not a
they don't have the
major
resources,
priority.
maybe. Oh yeah, not the priority.
Yeah.
So first, okay, you talked about support of HTTP2 in CDN. Any other things that are important when choosing a CDN?
Yeah, I mean, your CDN can do a lot of security stuff. So, for example, Cloudflare recently mitigated a DDoS against the UK's political Labour Party. That was I think it was yesterday or the day before, the Labour Party had a DDoS attack against them. Cloudflare just shrugged it off. So there's that. Could act as your web application firewall, your load balancer. It could take, if you get an influx of traffic, it could take the heat off of your more expensive origin servers. Obviously, there's geographic location. They will deliver things close to your customers. Slightly more advanced things like request collapsing. So if you get, let's say, for example, a news story breaks in, I don't know, I can't think of a good example. Let's say like the Financial Times, which is an international newspaper, suddenly gets a huge exclusive story about some corruption in China. I don't know, for example. And all of a sudden, loads of Chinese visitors are hitting the site. And that's going to eventually, they'll need to come back to origin to get that story. Request collapsing is where a CDN edge can say, hang on, wait, I'm not going to send all 1,000 requests. I'm going to pause all of you for a little bit, grab that response once, and then give it to all 1,000 of you in real time. So that's called request collapsing, which is pretty smart, because in theory it sounds like it would make everything slower, but it's a way of, again, protecting your origin for a required origin pull. Edge side includes. So edge side includes would be great for a company who most of their pages are completely static, like an e-commerce website. The home page is the same for everyone. The category page is the same for everyone. But you've got a little shopping cart, right, which has maybe 5 items for one customer, 0 for another customer's logged in. Now you could do that in JavaScript, right? So you could have a largely static page and use the gem stack to get the dynamicism in the header in the shopping cart. Or you can have edge side includes, which is where you can go back to origin just for the dynamic parts of the page, insert those into the static everything else, and it's kind of a hybrid CDN origin solution. So it means you can basically cache or statically sort of generate the majority of the page and basically do an edge side include for the dynamic bits. These are like stretch goals. These are pretty complex things to do.
But how can you configure that at all?
Honestly, I'm not sure how it gets configured. sort of intricately because I don't do any back-end work.
Right. Yeah.
But it is basically, you can have a bit of it's like an include, like a dynamic include on.
Yeah. Okay.
If you've got like an include, maybe a PHP include on your own web server, it's like that, but instead of it being on the
So
same
they are called
server,
edge includes.
edge side includes. So
Edge
it's happening
side.
on the edge side rather than the
Nice.
server side.
I have a good use case in Prismic. Maybe I'll have
There you
a
go.
go.
Cloud front offer edge side includes.
Okay. Nice.
Other things like it's much easier to configure a CDN than it is to configure your own origin because most CDNs have a GUI. So turning Brotli on in CloudFront or Akamai or Cloudflare is basically checking one box, whereas to do that on an IIS server, you probably have to restart it. To do that on Apache, you have to install the Brotli module. So ease of configuration and generally cost saving as well. Their networks are configured to be a little more efficient than
and actually, so one of the things that surprised us about CloudFront is that we were using it and we didn't have any kind of we were not thinking of trying to change it or anything, but suddenly at one day Amazon contacted us and told us like, look guys, you're paying a lot and maybe you can pay less and this is how you pay less.
That's good of them.
Yeah,
that's nice.
That was very good because maybe that's smart because that's the point. Maybe they knew that's the point where people start considering other solutions.
Yeah,
they were like, okay, let's get ahead of that and tell them how to like cut on their costs before they start thinking of moving somewhere else and start, because once you start thinking, you'll start seeing the features and other things. Whereas if you don't have that thinking, that will be even better. But it was a good commercial. I like that, they kind of try to make you cut costs. It's not only about overselling you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, they need to build trust as well because...
And they're good at it.
A company like yourselves who are, as we've discussed earlier today, right? You're on a growth trajectory and you're going from strength to strength. CloudFront and any vendor you use would be wise to see that and think, look, we need to keep on board with these people because as they scale, we want to support them. We want to be part of their journey.
Yeah.
We don't want to tax them for getting bigger. They want to actually work alongside them. So it's pretty smart. I'd like to think they were thinking along those lines.
We learned from that experience. So like we should be doing the same.
Yeah, that's good.
So now we talked about like, okay, CDN. Okay. Now what other things that you would think about when looking at web performance? Like, okay, get the CDN. By the way, CDN, do you see your clients or people you work with more using it as a proxy, or do they kind of post content into it? Post assets into it?
Yeah, normally what they're going to be doing is using it as kind of a proxy. It'll be a pull-based thing. So
it's much easier, right?
Yeah,
model.
They won't deploy to the edge. They'll probably just have, upon initial request, it'll get pulled through to the edge.
Yeah. Much simpler, maybe much simpler.
Way simpler.
Model,
usually what most of my clients need for static assets more than anything. But beyond that, I mean, the web performance story has barely begun. So one of my things that I obsess about the most is making sure that HTML pages are built correctly. Because obviously once the HTML's made it to the browser, that's going to start asking for everything else. JavaScript, images, fonts, whatever. So making sure that all the sub-resources are correctly discoverable, correctly
Wait. Like this is a big topic. HTML done correctly. Can we do it in its own video?
Should we move into its own video? We can do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Down for the fourth video, right?
That's a good bit of content.